The foundation of determination. Alicia Morgan stepped out of her car, heels clicking against the pavement, as she approached the gleaming glass doors of Briarwood Finance Group. It was her third bank visit this month. Her friends and colleagues had told her this one might be different, that Briarwood had a progressive approach to lending and might finally give her the support she needed for her expanding skincare business. As she walked through the doors, Alicia felt a surge of pride. Dressed in a sophisticated navy suit, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun, she knew she looked every bit the successful businesswoman she had worked tirelessly to become. 6 years ago, she'd started her skincare company with nothing more than a handful of homemade products and a vision. Through sleepless nights, trial and error, and meticulous care, she had grown her company into a profitable brand with a loyal customer base, a line of well-received products, and positive press in multiple beauty publications. Today, she was ready to take the next big step, opening her first physical storefront and expanding production. This was no small feat. Her growth forecast was robust, and with the right support, she could take her business to a new level. But for that, she needed capital, and so far, the financial institution she had approached had been reluctant to approve her request. As Alicia approached the reception desk, she smiled and introduced herself. "Good morning, I'm Alicia Morgan. I have a 10 o'clock appointment with Mr. Kingston." The receptionist looked up, her gaze cool and appraising as she scanned Alicia's outfit and face. After a moment's pause, she nodded, her expression softening only slightly. "Of course, Ms. Morgan. Mr. Kingston's office is down the hall, last door on the left. He'll be with you shortly." Alicia thanked her and found a seat in the waiting area, arranging her carefully prepared documents. Financial records, growth forecasts, market analyses, and testimonials from her satisfied customers. She had made sure to prepare everything meticulously. This was her moment, and she wasn't about to let anything slip through the cracks. Minutes later, a tall, impeccably dressed man entered the room and extended a hand. "Ms. Morgan, I'm Robert Kingston. Thank you for waiting." Alicia stood and shook his hand, her smile warm yet confident. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Kingston. I appreciate your time." Kingston led her into his spacious, modern office. As she took her seat, she couldn't help but notice the opulent furniture, the framed degrees on the wall, and the awards for excellence in finance that adorned his shelves. Settling behind his desk, Kingston took a long look at her before opening the file she had submitted. "So, Ms. Morgan, I see you're looking for a fairly substantial loan," he began, his voice cool and measured. "Can you tell me a bit about your business?" Alicia nodded, keeping her voice steady as she began to explain. "Yes, I own and operate a skincare company. We focus on high-quality, natural ingredients and have been growing steadily over the last 6 years. We're currently serving over 15,000 customers, and I'm now looking to expand. With this loan, I plan to open a storefront in a high-traffic area and increase production to meet demand." Kingston flipped through the documents with a practiced air, barely glancing at the numbers and growth projections she had carefully compiled. "And what sort of collateral are you able to provide?" he asked, his tone barely concealing an undercurrent of disinterest. Alicia felt a flicker of irritation but remained composed. "I've brought details of my business assets, including inventory and equipment. I've also included personal assets, and our monthly revenue is more than sufficient to cover the repayment terms." He leaned back, crossing his arms, his gaze turning cold. Monthly revenue, while respectable, is not always a reliable indicator for loans of this size. We prioritize applicants who have a more traditional portfolio of assets and income sources. The statement hung in the air, and Alicia understood what he was implying. She fought back a surge of anger. Her company was profitable, her assets were solid, and she had a meticulously crafted proposal that showed projected growth in black and white. She was more than qualified. And yet, it was clear that Kingston saw her as something else, an exception to his preferred clientele, a high-risk applicant who didn't fit neatly into his preconceived notions. "Mr. Kingston, Alicia began, choosing her words carefully. "I've worked extremely hard to build this business from the ground up. Our growth has been steady, our customer loyalty is strong, and I've provided ample proof of our stability." Kingston offered a thin smile, leaning back in his chair. "Ms. Morgan, it's admirable, really, but we must be realistic. Expansion is risky, and this bank has certain standards we follow. I don't make the rules. I enforce them." It was a brush-off, thinly veiled, and laced with condescension. Alicia felt a pang of frustration, yet she refused to let it show on her face. She had worked tirelessly to reach this point, and she was not about to let one dismissive banker diminish her efforts. With a measured breath, she straightened. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Kingston," she said, her voice cool. Gathering her documents, she stood and shook his hand once more, feeling the full weight of his dismissive gaze as she left his office. Outside, she took a moment to compose herself, feeling the sting of rejection mingling with the bitter taste of injustice. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered this kind of resistance, but something about today left her feeling particularly unsettled. Why, after all her hard work, was she still being underestimated, dismissed, and written off? Determined not to let Kingston's treatment define her, she pulled out her phone and dialed the number of her close friend and confidant, Evelyn, a successful entrepreneur in her own right, and someone who understood the challenges of building a business from the ground up. Eva had faced her own battles in the corporate world and had always encouraged Alicia to keep pushing forward. Eva picked up after the first ring. "Alicia, how did the meeting go?" Alicia let out a sigh, her voice tinged with frustration. "Not great. It was the same old story. He barely looked at my proposal before deciding I wasn't worth the risk." There was a pause on the other end, and then Eva's voice hardened. "I've heard about that happening at Briarwood. You know, you're not the first business owner they've turned away under similar circumstances. It seems they have a type they prefer." Alicia's grip tightened on her phone. "You mean they have a prejudice they prefer?" "Exactly," Eva replied, her voice laced with indignation. "It's happened to a couple of people I know as well. And they had perfectly good businesses, just like you. Maybe it's time someone called them out on it." Alicia felt a spark of determination reignite within her. "You're right, Eva. Maybe it's time I take a stand, not just for myself, but for everyone who's been dismissed and disrespected like this." "Absolutely. And I'm with you every step of the way. Let's make sure they understand that they can't keep treating people like this," Eva said, her voice brimming with support. They talked for a while longer, strategizing and discussing options. Alicia knew this fight wasn't going to be easy, but she also knew she wasn't alone. With Eva's encouragement and her own resolve, Alicia felt a renewed sense of purpose. As she ended the call, Alicia stood taller, her frustration transforming into a fierce determination. She would return to Briarwood, not just as a businesswoman seeking a loan, but as an advocate for change. She would not allow her business, and those of others who deserved a fair shot, to be dismissed simply because they didn't fit into some arbitrary mold. The journey was just beginning, and Alicia was ready for whatever came next. Allies and ambitions. The days following Alicia's meeting with Mr. Kingston left her feeling torn between frustration and renewed resolve. She replayed their interaction in her mind, reliving each patronizing glance, every dismissive word, and the icy distance that had been carefully maintained, as if her work and dedication meant nothing in the face of his standards. But Alicia knew her worth, and she had no intention of letting this roadblock deter her from her goals. Briarwood Finance Group might have closed the door, but Alicia was determined to find another way in, and she knew she couldn't do it alone. It was late in the evening, her office dimly lit, as Alicia sat at her desk, deep in thought. The phone call with Eva had left her inspired, and now, as she thumbed through her contacts, she started listing people who might have insight or influence within the financial industry. A small defiant smile played on her lips. If the traditional route wasn't willing to give her a fair chance, she'd carve her own path. There was a growing roster of friends, colleagues, and fellow entrepreneurs who would stand by her, people who understood what it was like to be underestimated and dismissed. Her first call was to Marcus Dawson, a former finance executive who had recently launched a consulting firm geared toward helping small businesses access funding. Marcus was both a friend and an ally, a mentor who had always believed in her and her brand. When she told him about her encounter with Kingston, his response was immediate. "Are you serious? Kingston wouldn't even look at your projections. Alicia, your business is a model for what they should be investing in. This isn't just ridiculous, it's insulting." Alicia nodded, though Marcus couldn't see her. "Exactly. I have everything they could ask for. Solid revenue, stable growth, and a clear plan." But it was like none of that mattered to him. Marcus's voice grew thoughtful. "You know, you're not the only one who's told me about this kind of treatment. I've heard similar stories from other entrepreneurs, mostly people of color and women, all claiming that their proposals were treated with skepticism or outright disregard. It's like they have a gatekeeping system in place to prevent certain types of applicants from even getting a chance." The weight of his words settled over her. Alicia had suspected as much, but hearing it from someone with Marcus's background gave her the validation she needed. This wasn't just her fight. It was part of a larger, systemic issue. "Then we need to do something about it," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not just going to walk away. I know I deserve a fair shot, and so do the others who have faced this kind of discrimination. If Briarwood has a pattern of this behavior, it's time they're held accountable." Marcus chuckled, a hint of admiration in his tone. "That's the Alicia I know. You're right. Let's start by building a coalition. I'll reach out to a few people I know who might have similar experiences. We'll gather information, create a case, and if Briarwood isn't willing to listen, we'll make sure someone else does." They spoke for nearly an hour, brainstorming strategies, discussing potential allies, and laying out a plan for gathering testimonies. Marcus promised to compile any reports he received and reach out to a few industry connections who might be willing to help. Alicia felt a surge of gratitude for Marcus's support, but more than that, she felt the embers of hope rekindling. Over the next few days, Alicia threw herself into the task of reaching out to other business owners. Her first call was to Renee Wilson, a woman who had launched a successful organic food line. Renee had been through her own battles for funding and had barely managed to scrape together enough investment to expand her business. "I know exactly what you're talking about," Renee said, her voice tinged with frustration. "When I went in for a loan, they didn't even look at my numbers before telling me it was too early for someone like me to expand. I mean, I've been profitable for 3 years straight, but it was as if they'd made up their minds before I even walked in." Alicia's heart ached at the story. "It sounds like they're following a script," she said, a bitter edge to her voice. "This can't just be a coincidence. I'm compiling testimonies, Renee, and if you're willing, I'd like to add your story." Renee didn't hesitate. "Count me in. People like us shouldn't have to jump through extra hoops just to get the same opportunities. I'll send you my proposal documents, too, just in case they try to deny what happened." With every conversation, Alicia felt her resolve harden. The stories poured in, each one strikingly similar to her own experience. A young black entrepreneur in tech denied financing, despite his startup's exponential growth. A Latina restaurateur shut down before she could even finish her pitch, and an artist with a thriving home decor business who had been told her numbers were unreliable. Each of them shared the same painful recognition of having their dreams dismissed and their ambitions minimized. Alicia spent her evenings poring over documents, gathering everything she could find on Briarwood Finance Group's lending patterns. She reached out to professional organizations, financial advocacy groups, and even contacted a few investigative journalists she had met at networking events. By the end of the week, she had amassed a formidable file of testimonies, documents, and data. Determined to keep pushing forward, she called up her old professor, Dr. Henry Blake, a respected economist and researcher who had recently published a paper on discriminatory lending practices. Alicia had taken his class on business ethics years ago, and she still remembered his emphasis on corporate accountability. She explained her findings to him, her voice filled with a mixture of anger and purpose. Dr. Blake listened intently, occasionally asking questions or jotting down notes. When she finished, he took a deep breath. "Alicia, this is serious. What you're describing is more than just a few isolated incidents. It sounds like there could be a systematic bias at play. And if that's the case, Briarwood could face significant consequences." "That's exactly what I'm hoping for," she replied. "But I need proof. I need to show a pattern, a consistent disregard for people like us." Dr. Blake nodded. "I can help. I'll analyze the data you've collected, and we'll look for any trends that indicate discrimination. If we can prove that there's a pattern, we can make a case to regulators or even take it to the media. Sometimes, shining a spotlight on these practices is the only way to bring about change." Alicia felt a rush of gratitude. "Thank you, Dr. Blake. I'm not just doing this for me. I'm doing it for everyone who's been unfairly treated. This isn't just about getting a loan. It's about equality, about having the same chance to succeed as anyone else." They agreed to meet the following week to review the data. Alicia left the call feeling a renewed sense of hope. For the first time, it felt like there was real momentum behind her efforts. She wasn't alone in this fight. She had allies, people who believed in her cause and were willing to stand by her. That weekend, Alicia sat down with her father, Richard Morgan, over dinner. Her father was a well-respected figure in the business world, a man who had made a name for himself as a self-made entrepreneur and investor. Though their relationship was close, Alicia hadn't yet told him about her struggle with Briarwood. She wasn't sure how he would react. He'd always taught her to be resilient, to overcome obstacles on her own terms. But as they ate, her father noticed her distracted expression and set down his fork, a concerned look crossing his face. "Alicia, is something on your mind?" She took a deep breath, deciding it was time to be honest. "Actually, there is, Dad. I went to Briarwood Finance Group to apply for a loan, but they dismissed my proposal without even giving it a fair look. And I've discovered that it's not just me. It's a pattern. They're turning away qualified applicants because they don't fit some narrow idea of acceptable clients." Her father's brow furrowed as he listened. "Are you saying they're discriminating against you?" "Not just me," Alicia replied, her voice firm. "There are others, people who deserve an equal chance but are denied because of their background or identity, and I'm not going to let them get away with it. I'm building a case, and I have people who are willing to speak up." For a moment, her father was silent, studying her face. Then, with a nod, he reached across the table and took her hand. "Alicia, I'm proud of you. What you're doing takes courage. But be careful. People in power don't like having their flaws exposed. If you need my help, if there's anything I can do, I want you to know that I'm here for you." Alicia felt a surge of gratitude and relief. Her father's support meant more to her than he could know. "Thank you, Dad. That means everything to me." As the evening wore on, they discussed her plans, strategizing, and considering every angle. Her father promised to introduce her to a few influential contacts who might be able to support her cause, and Alicia left their conversation, feeling stronger than ever. With her coalition growing and her resolve unshaken, Alicia knew she was ready for the next phase. Briarwood's gatekeepers had built a wall to keep people like her out, but she was determined to break it down. And this time, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every entrepreneur who had ever been told they didn't belong. The stage was set, and Alicia was ready to make her stand. The gathering storm. Alicia's mission was gaining traction, and as each day passed, her list of allies grew longer. She had testimonies from entrepreneurs in various industries, financial analysis support from Dr. Blake, and encouragement from her father and friends. But despite this groundswell of support, she knew the battle wasn't just about rallying voices. It was about making those voices impossible to ignore. One evening, Alicia received a message from a prominent journalist, Rachel Kim, who had been investigating corporate discrimination and systemic biases in the financial industry. Rachel's work had already made waves, exposing unfair lending practices and amplifying the stories of marginalized business owners. Seeing Rachel's message, Alicia felt a spark of hope. She had been contemplating the right moment to bring the media in, and it seemed fate was on her side. Rachel's message was straightforward and direct, her words reflecting a shared determination. Alicia, I heard through Dr. Blake that you're gathering testimonies about discriminatory practices at Briarwood Finance Group. I'd love to talk to you, and if you're willing, I'd like to help bring this story to light. The very next day, Alicia and Rachel met in a cozy, discreet cafe downtown. Alicia arrived early, nursing a cup of herbal tea as she reviewed her notes, determined to present a clear, compelling narrative. When Rachel arrived, her presence was as commanding as her reputation suggested, confident yet warm, with a keen gaze that seemed to take in every detail. They exchanged introductions, and Rachel wasted no time. Alicia, I appreciate you speaking with me. Discrimination in lending is pervasive, and stories like yours can have a powerful impact. I want to understand everything about your experience, so don't hold back. Alicia took a deep breath, then launched into the story, recounting every aspect of her interaction with Mr. Kingston, from his dismissive tone to his clear unwillingness to even review her proposal. She shared the details of her business's success, her careful preparation, and the casual way Kingston had dismissed her assets and projections. Rachel listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes or nodding in quiet sympathy. When Alicia finished, Rachel leaned forward, her expression intense. You're not alone, Alicia. I've documented dozens of stories like this. Banks use loopholes, unspoken quotas, and vague policies to justify denying loans to qualified applicants. But what you're doing, organizing, gathering testimonies, this could change the game. If you're ready, I think we can make a powerful case. Alicia nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I am ready, Rachel. I've collected stories from other business owners, many of them women and people of color, who've had similar experiences. We need to show that this isn't just about one meeting or one loan officer. This is about Briarwood's whole approach. They spent hours discussing the next steps, formulating a plan to bring the issue to light. Alicia agreed to connect Rachel with other entrepreneurs who were willing to share their stories, and Rachel promised to investigate Briarwood's loan approval records. Alicia knew this was risky, but if they could reveal a pattern, there would be no denying the impact. By the end of the meeting, Alicia felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time, her story was being taken seriously, and someone with influence was ready to champion it. She thanked Rachel and promised to keep her updated as more stories and evidence emerge. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Alicia worked tirelessly, coordinating with Rachel, gathering data, and speaking to other business owners. She connected Rachel with Renee, Marcus, and others who had experienced similar rejection and dismissal at Briarwood. The process was exhausting, yet Alicia found strength in each conversation, in each moment of shared frustration and hope. One morning, Alicia was reviewing documents in her office when she received an unexpected call from David Langston, a high-profile civil rights attorney who had successfully handled several cases involving discriminatory practices in corporations. David was known for his relentless pursuit of justice and had a reputation for taking on cases others deemed too controversial. Alicia Morgan, he said, his voice steady and warm. I've heard about what you're doing, and I want you to know that I'm behind you. If this goes to court, I'd be honored to represent you. Alicia's breath caught. She had been prepared to face Briarwood on her own terms, but David's offer added a new dimension to her plans. David, thank you. Your support means more than I can say. I haven't fully decided if I'm going to pursue legal action yet, but knowing I have your support is a huge relief. Take your time, David replied, his tone understanding. I'll be here if you need me. Cases like this need preparation, but I want you to know that your fight is important. This isn't just about a loan. It's about opening doors for people who've been shut out. After the call, Alicia felt a sense of reassurance. With Rachel bringing the story to the public eye and David potentially offering legal backing, her movement was no longer just a personal crusade. It was becoming a genuine force for change. As Alicia continued her work, she noticed small signs of progress. Rachel's investigation was turning up patterns that hinted at systemic discrimination within Briarwood. She found discrepancies in loan approvals, instances where clients with equal or even lesser qualifications had been approved while others, like Alicia, had been denied. Then one Friday afternoon, Alicia received a call from Briarwood Finance Group's CEO, George Caldwell. It was unexpected, yet Alicia felt a quiet thrill as she heard his voice, calm and collected, on the other end of the line. "Ms. Morgan," he began, his tone careful, "I understand you've raised some concerns about your recent experience with our lending department. I'd like to invite you to meet with me in person to discuss this matter directly." Alicia hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. She was well aware that this meeting could be an attempt to pacify her, to smooth things over before the situation escalated, but she was also ready to confront the leadership directly and present the evidence she had gathered. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," she replied, keeping her tone professional. "I'd be willing to meet, but I want you to know that this isn't just about my experience. I have testimonies from other business owners who have faced similar treatment at Briarwood. This is a systemic issue." There was a brief pause on the line, and she could almost feel Caldwell's surprise. "I understand, Ms. Morgan. Let's discuss it further in person. How does Monday at 10 a.m. sound?" Alicia agreed, and after hanging up, she immediately called Rachel to share the news. They strategized about how to approach the meeting, agreeing that Alicia would bring the testimony she had gathered as evidence. They were preparing for the possibility that Caldwell would try to downplay the issue, but Alicia was determined not to let that happen. Monday morning arrived, and Alicia entered Briarwood's headquarters with her head held high. As she walked through the familiar glass doors, she felt a rush of memories. Of the initial rejection, the dismissive tone of Kingston's voice, and the cold, clinical way he had dismissed her dream. But today, she wasn't coming to ask for approval. She was coming to demand accountability. Caldwell's assistant greeted her with a polite smile, leading her to the CEO's expansive office. The room was decorated in sleek, modern decor, with walls lined with awards and photos of Caldwell shaking hands with prominent business figures. He stood as she entered, extending his hand. "Ms. Morgan, thank you for coming," he said, his expression warm yet guarded. Alicia shook his hand, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Caldwell." They settled into their chairs, and after a few moments of polite small talk, Caldwell got down to business. "I understand you've had concerns about your experience with our lending department. I assure you, we take these matters very seriously, and I'm here to listen." Alicia wasted no time. "Mr. Caldwell, my concerns go beyond my experience. I have documentation of discriminatory practices within Briarwood. I've spoken to numerous business owners who were denied loans under similar circumstances, and I've compiled evidence of a pattern of bias in your loan approvals. This isn't just about one loan officer. It's about a culture of exclusion that has real consequences for people's lives and businesses." As she spoke, she placed the file of testimonies and documents on his desk, watching his reaction closely. Caldwell's face remained neutral, though a hint of discomfort flickered in his eyes as he glanced at the file. After a moment, he looked back at her, his tone calm but firm. "Ms. Morgan, I understand that you feel strongly about this, and I can assure you that we're committed to fair practices. If there are concerns with our policies, we will address them." Alicia leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Mr. Caldwell, this isn't about feelings. This is about facts. I have evidence that Briarwood has consistently denied loans to qualified applicants based on vague criteria that seem to be applied selectively. This has affected not only my business, but also countless others. If you're committed to fair practices, Then I ask that you review this evidence and take immediate action." Caldwell was silent, his gaze fixed on the file in front of him. After a few tense moments, he looked up, his expression more serious. "I'll review the evidence, Ms. Morgan, and if there's any truth to your claims, I assure you we will take corrective measures." Alicia felt a flicker of hope, but kept her voice steady. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I'll expect to hear back soon. And if I don't, I want you to know that I have the support of the media and the legal community behind me. This issue isn't going away." As she rose to leave, Caldwell extended his hand again, his gaze somber. "Ms. Morgan, thank you for bringing this to my attention. We will be in touch." Alicia left the office feeling a mixture of relief and anticipation. She had taken the fight to the top, and now the ball was in Briarwood's court. With Rachel and David backing her, and a growing coalition of supporters, Alicia knew that this was more than a battle for her business. It was a movement, one that was poised to shake the foundations of Briarwood Finance Group and beyond. The unveiling of injustice. Alicia left the bank that day feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. She had faced down one of the top figures at Briarwood Finance Group, forcing him to confront the very real problem of discrimination within his organization. Her coalition of supporters had grown in both strength and number, and she had put Briarwood on notice. Things would no longer be swept under the rug, but she knew the fight was far from over. The following week was a frenzy of activity. Alicia and Rachel continued gathering additional testimonies, while Dr. Blake was hard at work analyzing the data Alicia had collected. Rachel's investigation was building steam, her team unearthing documentation that showed loan approval rates at Briarwood were shockingly skewed. The numbers painted a stark picture. Loans to minority applicants were approved at a fraction of the rate for other groups, even when financial qualifications were the same. It was more than enough to validate Alicia's claims, and Rachel knew it. One afternoon, Rachel called Alicia with an update that left her feeling both gratified and shocked. "Alicia, we're finding some pretty damning evidence. I have access to Briarwood's public financial records, and I've managed to pull a few confidential loan files as well," Rachel explained, her voice crackling with excitement. "There's a clear disparity. Applicants who should have been approved were denied, and in some cases, loans were given to applicants with worse financial profiles who just happened to fit a certain look." Alicia felt a surge of anger as she absorbed Rachel's words. She had always known that discrimination was likely part of Briarwood's loan process, but to see it confirmed with hard data was enraging. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was a systemic failure that had impacted countless lives and dreams. "Thank you, Rachel," Alicia replied, her voice firm. "This is exactly what we need. They can't deny numbers. We have to make this public." Rachel agreed, and they decided to publish an exposé on Briarwood's practices. The piece would not only highlight Alicia's personal experience, but also feature testimonials from other business owners who had been subjected to the same discriminatory treatment. Alicia spent the next few days preparing herself for the scrutiny and potential backlash, knowing this article would be a bombshell that Briarwood couldn't ignore. As she waited for the story to go live, Alicia spent her nights reading through emails from fellow entrepreneurs who had reached out, sharing their own stories of rejection and disrespect at Briarwood and other financial institutions. Some of the messages were heartbreaking, detailing dreams crushed by dismissive bankers and businesses that had folded due to lack of access to capital. One message, in particular, stood out to Alicia. It was from a woman named Nia Lawrence, a single mother who had struggled to secure a loan for her catering business. Nia's story hit close to home, and Alicia felt a pang of empathy as she read it. "I poured everything I had into this business," Nia wrote. "My credit was solid, I had contracts lined up, and I had a well-thought-out business plan. But they barely looked at it before saying I wasn't a suitable candidate. That loan was my last shot, and without it, I had to let go of my dream." Alicia couldn't stop thinking about Nia's message. She had been lucky enough to find the support she needed to keep fighting, but she knew that others weren't as fortunate. Nia's words fueled her determination, reminding her why this battle was so important. 2 days later, Rachel called again, her voice filled with urgency. "Alicia, the article is scheduled to go live tomorrow. We're giving Briarwood a chance to respond, but the data speaks for itself. Are you ready for this?" Alicia took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of anxiety and resolve. "Yes, Rachel. I'm ready. Let's make sure they understand this isn't just another story. It's the start of something bigger." When the article finally published, it was explosive. Titled, "The Unseen Gatekeepers: How Briarwood Finance Group Denies Minority Entrepreneurs the Capital They Deserve," it was a scathing expose on the discriminatory lending practices at Briarwood. The story opened with Alicia's experience, detailing her encounter with Kingston and his dismissive attitude, then widened its focus to include other business owners' stories, highlighting the consistent pattern of bias and exclusion. Rachel's team had laid out the data in clear, irrefutable terms, showcasing how Briarwood had consistently approved loans for less qualified applicants while systematically denying qualified minority applicants. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The story spread like wildfire, with major news outlets picking it up and business leaders weighing in on the importance of fair lending practices. Alicia's phone was flooded with messages from supporters, colleagues, and journalists who wanted to interview her. She was invited to speak at forums and panel discussions about the issue, her voice becoming a rallying cry for entrepreneurs who had been shut out by biased gatekeepers. Briarwood was quick to respond, though not in the way Alicia had hoped. Within hours of the article's publication, George Caldwell released a carefully worded statement. He acknowledged the article and expressed deep concern over the allegations, but stopped short of admitting any wrongdoing. Instead, he framed the accusations as misunderstandings, vowing to review their lending practices to ensure they aligned with Briarwood's core values of inclusivity and fairness. Alicia read the statement with disbelief. It was a classic attempt at damage control, filled with vague promises and empty reassurances. She knew this was just the beginning, and Caldwell's half-hearted response only strengthened her resolve. That evening, as Alicia reviewed her notes and prepared for a television interview, she received an unexpected call from Caldwell himself. "Ms. Morgan," he began, his tone polished but tense, "I wanted to speak with you directly. I realize that the article has raised some difficult questions, and I'd like to invite you to meet with me and our board of directors. We are committed to making things right, and your perspective would be invaluable in helping us identify areas of improvement." Alicia held back a sigh, recognizing the political maneuvering in Caldwell's words. She knew this invitation was likely a tactic to placate her, to show the public that Briarwood was taking action. But Alicia had no intention of letting Caldwell and his team off the hook that easily. "I appreciate the invitation, Mr. Caldwell," she replied, her tone measured. "But this isn't just about sitting down to talk. This is about systemic change. If I agree to meet with you, I want assurance that this will be more than just a PR move. I need to know that real reform is on the table." There was a pause on the line, and she could almost sense Caldwell weighing his options. "Ms. Morgan, I assure you that Briarwood is taking these concerns very seriously. Let's discuss this in person. We're open to suggestions on how to move forward in a way that benefits everyone involved." After a moment's thought, Alicia agreed to meet with him and the board, but she made it clear that she was bringing Rachel, Dr. Blake, and a few of the entrepreneurs who had shared their stories. If Briarwood wanted to hear her perspective, they would have to face the reality of what their actions had cost so many others. The meeting was set for the following week, and in the days leading up to it, Alicia and her team prepared thoroughly. They reviewed every piece of evidence, every testimony, and every statistic. Alicia knew that this meeting would be her chance to hold Briarwood accountable, and she intended to make it count. When the day finally arrived, Alicia entered Briarwood's headquarters flanked by her team. Rachel was by her side, her expression fierce, while Dr. Blake carried a stack of data that could not be ignored. Behind them walked several other entrepreneurs, Renee, Marcus, and Nia, all of whom had faced rejection and humiliation at the hands of Briarwood's loan officers. The boardroom was filled with senior executives, including Caldwell and Mr. Kingston. Alicia could see the tension on their faces as she took her seat, sensing that they were acutely aware of the gravity of the situation. Caldwell opened the meeting with a polite greeting, thanking Alicia and her team for coming. But Alicia wasn't here for pleasantries. As soon as Caldwell finished his opening remarks, she launched into her presentation, outlining the clear patterns of bias they had uncovered. Mr. Caldwell, members of the board, this isn't about isolated incidents or individual misunderstandings, Alicia said, her voice steady. This is about a systemic issue within Briarwood's lending practices that has hurt countless entrepreneurs. These are people who deserved a chance, who came to you with viable business plans and were dismissed without due consideration. The data we've collected speaks for itself. Dr. Blake followed with an in-depth analysis of the data, presenting charts and graphs that illustrated the stark disparities in Briarwood's loan approval rates. As he spoke, Caldwell and the board members grew visibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and exchanging uneasy glances. Rachel then presented her findings from the article, laying out each testimonial in detail, each one a damning account of Briarwood's failure to provide equal opportunity. By the time she finished, there was a heavy silence in the room. Caldwell cleared his throat, his expression grim. "Ms. Morgan, I appreciate the thoroughness of your presentation. It's clear that there are areas where we need improvement. I would like to propose the creation of a task force to investigate these issues further and to implement reforms that will ensure fair treatment for all applicants." Alicia shook her head, her tone resolute. "A task force is a start, Mr. Caldwell, but it's not enough. I want concrete commitments, clear guidelines for loan officers, diversity training, and oversight from independent auditors to ensure that these changes are actually enforced. And I want Briarwood to issue a formal apology to every entrepreneur who has been wronged by your discriminatory practices." Caldwell looked taken aback, but he nodded slowly. "Your demands are fair, Ms. Morgan. We'll implement these measures and take responsibility for the harm that has been caused. Briarwood will work to rebuild the trust we've broken." Alicia held his gaze, sensing the sincerity in his words, but also recognizing the work that lay ahead. This was a victory, but it was only the beginning. Real change would take time, persistence, and accountability, and she was ready to hold Briarwood to its promises. As she left the boardroom that day, surrounded by her team, Alicia felt a sense of triumph tempered with resolve. She had opened the door to change, and she knew that her fight had made a difference, not just for her, but for every entrepreneur who had ever been denied an opportunity based on bias. The journey was far from over, but Alicia had set a powerful precedent. Briarwood would no longer be able to hide behind closed doors, and the world was watching. The road to accountability. The weeks that followed Alicia's meeting with the board at Briarwood Finance Group were transformative. Briarwood's leaders had publicly committed to reform, promising to overhaul their lending practices and enforce new policies that would promote transparency and equality. For Alicia, it felt like the culmination of months of frustration, resilience, and relentless advocacy. But even as the initial excitement waned, she knew that true accountability required vigilance, and she was ready to ensure that Briarwood's promises would translate into real lasting change. Alicia's story had already made headlines, but the response from the business community and the public was far greater than she had anticipated. Her inbox was flooded with messages from entrepreneurs, community leaders, and supporters who saw her as a symbol of defiance and hope. Media requests poured in, and Alicia found herself speaking on panels, participating in interviews, and even being invited to guest lectures at universities. Her experience had struck a nerve, shining a light on the unspoken obstacles faced by countless entrepreneurs, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds. One evening, as Alicia was reviewing emails, she noticed a message from the National Association for Business Equality, NABE, a nonprofit organization that advocated for fair treatment of small business owners. The email was an invitation to speak at their annual conference, an event attended by policymakers, corporate leaders, and entrepreneurs from across the country. We'd like you to deliver the keynote address. The email read, "Your story embodies the kind of courage and determination that inspires change, and we believe your voice could influence a wider push for financial fairness across the industry." Alicia read the email twice, a mix of pride and trepidation settling over her. She had never imagined herself as a keynote speaker, let alone as someone leading the charge for such a monumental cause. But she knew she couldn't turn it down. This was an opportunity to extend her impact, to make sure that her experience was not just a single victory, but a catalyst for a broader movement. The days leading up to the conference were filled with preparations. Alicia worked closely with Rachel and Dr. Blake, refining her speech and crafting a powerful message. She knew that this was her chance to advocate not only for entrepreneurs who had faced discrimination, but also to urge policymakers and corporate leaders to take action. Her speech would be a call to arms, a rallying cry for an industry that too often hid behind red tape and vague policies. When the day of the conference finally arrived, Alicia felt a swell of nerves as she stood backstage, watching the attendees file into the grand hall. The room was filled with influential figures from various industries, people who had the power to shape policies and practices, people who could make or break the dreams of countless entrepreneurs. As she looked out over the crowd, she saw faces filled with expectation, curiosity, and even skepticism. But Alicia was ready. She had lived this story, and now it was her turn to share it with the world. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the stage, the spotlight casting a warm glow over her. The room fell silent as she approached the podium. And for a moment, Alicia let herself absorb the gravity of the moment. This was not just a speech. It was a chance to change minds, to plant seeds of transformation in an industry that desperately needed it. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Today, I'm here not only as a business owner, but as someone who has witnessed firsthand the barriers that many of us face when we seek the support we need to grow and succeed. My story is just one of many, but I hope it will shed light on an issue that affects countless entrepreneurs who are often unseen, unheard, and unconsidered." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "When I walked into Briarwood Finance Group months ago, I believed I was prepared. I had built a profitable business, I had years of financial records, and I had a clear plan for growth. But what I encountered wasn't a fair evaluation of my business's potential. Instead, I was met with skepticism, dismissiveness, and a series of obstacles that had nothing to do with my qualifications. And sadly, I discovered that my experience was not unique." Alicia recounted her journey, the rejection, the frustration, the rallying of allies, and finally, the evidence she had uncovered that proved Briarwood's practices were more than isolated incidents. She spoke about the importance of fairness and transparency, emphasizing that access to capital should be based on merit, not on subjective biases. As she neared the end of her speech, she looked out over the audience, her gaze fierce and determined. "Today, I'm calling on each of you, leaders, policymakers, and business owners, to help dismantle the barriers that prevent deserving entrepreneurs from reaching their full potential. Let's create an industry where every applicant is evaluated fairly, where every business owner is given a chance to prove themselves. The success of our economy depends on diversity, innovation, and the willingness to invest in potential, regardless of background or identity." Her words were met with a standing ovation, the applause resonating throughout the hall. Alicia felt a wave of relief and pride as she stepped down from the podium, shaking hands with supporters who approached her, each one expressing gratitude and encouragement. After the speech, Alicia spent hours networking, discussing ideas with entrepreneurs and policymakers alike. She met with representatives from major financial institutions who wanted to understand how they could improve their practices, as well as activists who wanted to partner with her on future initiatives. By the end of the day, Alicia felt a profound sense of purpose. She had not only shared her story but had inspired others to join her in the fight for equity in lending. In the weeks that followed, Briarwood's commitment to reform began to take shape. Alicia kept a close eye on their progress, meeting with Caldwell and the newly formed task force to review updates on their policy changes. Caldwell was visibly committed to the process, though Alicia sensed that the pressure of public scrutiny was a significant motivator. Briarwood implemented several changes, including a new set of loan evaluation criteria, mandatory anti-bias training for all loan officers, and the hiring of an independent auditing firm to monitor compliance. Alicia also played a key role in the development of a new program at Briarwood, aimed specifically at minority-owned businesses. This program, called Pathway to Progress, offered mentorship, financial education, and a streamlined application process for small business owners from underrepresented backgrounds. Alicia was asked to serve as an advisor for the program, an opportunity she gladly accepted. One afternoon, Alicia received a call from Caldwell's assistant, inviting her to attend an official launch event for Pathway to Progress. It was to be a media-covered event, with several influential figures in attendance. Alicia was both excited and cautious. She knew this was an important step, but she also wanted to make sure it was more than just a PR move. The event took place in Briarwood's main lobby, a sleek, modern space with towering windows and elegant decor. Reporters, community leaders, and business owners filled the room, and Alicia spotted several of her allies in the crowd: Rachel, Dr. Blake, and even Marcus, who had been one of the first people to encourage her to take a stand. As the event began, Caldwell stepped up to the podium, addressing the audience with a solemn expression. He spoke about Briarwood's commitment to change, acknowledging the mistakes of the past and promising to create a more inclusive and equitable lending environment. Alicia listened intently, appreciating his willingness to admit fault, though she remained mindful that words would only matter if they were followed by sustained action. Then, to Alicia's surprise, Caldwell invited her to the stage, introducing her as the driving force behind the change. As she stepped forward, she felt a surge of emotion, pride, gratitude, and a sense of accomplishment. She had turned a painful experience into a platform for change, and now she was being recognized for her role in transforming an entire institution. Standing before the audience, Alicia spoke with humility and resolve. "Thank you for this opportunity," she began. "It has been a long journey to get here, but today I am proud to see real steps being taken toward a fairer, more equitable future. Pathway to Progress represents more than just a program. It's a promise that Briarwood will no longer be a gatekeeper, but a gateway for entrepreneurs who deserve a chance to succeed." Her words were met with applause, and Alicia felt a sense of validation that went beyond her personal achievements. She had helped pave the way for others, creating a path where there had once been only barriers. After the event, Alicia spent time speaking with attendees, answering questions and sharing their thoughts on the road ahead. She was approached by several business owners who expressed admiration and gratitude, their voices filled with hope. One of them was Nia Lawrence, the caterer who had reached out to Alicia weeks earlier with her story of rejection. Alicia was thrilled to meet her in person, and they embraced warmly. "Thank you, Alicia," Nia said, her eyes shining. "Because of you, I'm finally getting the support I need. I've applied for the Pathway to Progress program, and I just got approved for a loan. This is a new beginning for me." Alicia felt tears prick her eyes as she hugged Nia. This was why she had fought so hard, so that people like Nia could pursue their dreams without fear of unfair rejection. Over the following months, Pathway to Progress gained traction, with more minority-owned businesses benefiting from Briarwood's new policies. Alicia continued her work as an advisor, ensuring that the program remained true to its mission. Her experience with Briarwood had also opened doors she never could have imagined. She was invited to serve on boards, to advise other companies on diversity and inclusion, and to speak at events where her voice could inspire change. One evening, as Alicia was winding down from a busy day, she received a call from her father. His voice was warm, filled with pride. "Alicia," he began, "I just read another article about you. The work you're doing, it's incredible. You've turned your fight into something that's helping so many people. I can't tell you how proud I am." Alicia smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "Thank you, Dad. I never thought I'd end up here, but I'm grateful that I can make a difference." As she hung up, Alicia reflected on how far she had come. She had started with a single goal, to grow her business, and ended up sparking a movement that reached far beyond her initial dreams. She had faced resistance, skepticism, and bias, but she had turned each obstacle into fuel for her journey. And now she was not just a business owner. She was an advocate, a leader, and a beacon for those who had been denied their rightful place at the table. Looking toward the future, Alicia knew that her work was far from over. But she was ready, knowing that every step she took was clearing a path for those who would come after her. She had opened doors that had once been shut tight, and she would keep them open, ensuring that no one else would face the barriers she had encountered. In the quiet of her office, Alicia felt a profound sense of peace. She had transformed her struggle into a legacy, and as long as she had a voice, she would continue to fight for those who needed it. The legacy of change. Months passed, and Alicia's life settled into a new rhythm, one in which advocacy had become as much a part of her identity as her skincare business. The impact of her journey was unfolding on multiple fronts. Pathway to Progress was flourishing, with dozens of minority-owned businesses accessing the mentorship, resources, and funding they had once been denied. Alicia felt a deep sense of purpose watching these businesses, each with its unique dream and ambition, finally have the opportunity to grow. But the broader vision she held extended far beyond Briarwood and its programs. She envisioned an industry transformed, where fair access to capital was the standard, not the exception. One crisp fall morning, Alicia was preparing for a meeting with Briarwood's diversity task force when her assistant, Julia, poked her head into the office. "Alicia, there's a man here to see you. He says he's a loan officer, but he doesn't have an appointment. He said he's willing to wait, though." Alicia looked up, surprised. It wasn't unusual for entrepreneurs or journalists to seek her out, but a loan officer. She motioned for Julia to send him in, curious to hear what had brought him to her doorstep. A few moments later, a tall man in his mid-40s entered her office, holding a leather-bound notebook. He introduced himself as James Evans, a senior loan officer at Briarwood Finance Group. His demeanor was both humble and earnest, a stark contrast to the aloof professionalism she had come to associate with Briarwood's higher-ups. "Thank you for seeing me, Ms. Morgan," he began, his tone respectful. "I've wanted to speak with you for a while now. I read the expose and followed the changes you've helped bring about at Briarwood. To be honest, it's given me a lot to think about." Alicia offered him a seat, listening intently. "Thank you, Mr. Evans. I'm glad to hear the story resonated with you. But I have to ask, why did you feel the need to come here today?" James shifted, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. "The truth is, I've been part of this system for over a decade. When I started, I was just following protocol, never really questioning the criteria or the gut instinct we were encouraged to use. But reading the article, hearing about Pathway to Progress, and seeing the data on who we were denying, it was a wake-up call. I realized that I had been part of the problem, whether I intended it or not." He paused, his gaze earnest. "I want to do better, Ms. Morgan. I want to be part of a different kind of banking, where I can help businesses thrive based on their merits, not on hidden biases." Alicia felt a surge of respect for him. She had fought to bring about change at Briarwood, but witnessing that change reach individuals was a new kind of victory. "I appreciate your honesty, James," she replied. "Change starts with accountability, and recognizing our role in these systems is the first step. I'd be glad to work with you, to help make sure we build a culture where every entrepreneur has a fair shot." James nodded, visibly relieved. "Thank you, Ms. Morgan. I'd like to attend your advisory sessions for Pathway to Progress and learn directly from these entrepreneurs. I think it would be invaluable to understand the challenges they faced and what they truly need from us." They scheduled a series of meetings, and over the next few months, Alicia saw James transform into one of the program's strongest advocates. He became a voice within Briarwood, pushing for further transparency in loan decisions and advocating for underrepresented applicants. His growth was a testament to the ripple effect Alicia's efforts had created, sparking change not just in policies but in mindsets. As Briarwood's initiatives gained recognition, Alicia's reputation as a trailblazer continued to grow. She was invited to serve on advisory boards for several financial institutions and became a sought-after speaker at conferences focused on diversity, inclusion, and ethical banking. Her voice resonated with those who believed in the power of fair access to opportunity, and she knew that every speech, every interview, was another chance to influence an industry slow to evolve. One evening, after a particularly successful event at which she had spoken alongside prominent business leaders and government officials, Alicia received a message from Rachel Kim, the journalist who had published the original exposé. Alicia, Rachel's message read, "I'm writing a follow-up piece on how Pathway to Progress has impacted businesses across the city. I've spoken to several of the program's participants, and they all attribute their success to your efforts. But I want to go deeper. What's next for you? What's your ultimate vision?" Alicia pondered Rachel's question, feeling both the weight of the past and the promise of the future. She hadn't considered what her ultimate vision looked like, but she knew she wasn't finished. Her own business was thriving, but her journey had opened her eyes to how many others were still fighting to be seen, heard, and supported. She crafted a response, her fingers hovering over the keys as she let her thoughts crystallize. "Rachel," she wrote, "my ultimate vision is a world where access to capital isn't a privilege for the few, but a right for anyone with a viable idea, regardless of their background. I want to see the finance industry transformed, where ethical lending is the standard, not the exception. And I believe it's possible. I've witnessed the power of change firsthand, and I'm committed to ensuring that it reaches every corner of our industry." Rachel's follow-up article, titled "Beyond Barriers: How Alicia Morgan is Transforming the Financial Landscape for Entrepreneurs," was published a week later. The article captured the full scope of Alicia's journey, highlighting how she had leveraged her initial fight with Briarwood into a larger movement. The piece featured stories from entrepreneurs who had thrived because of Pathway to Progress, and it painted Alicia as a visionary leader driving change from within the industry. The response was overwhelming, with the story going viral and Alicia receiving messages from people all over the country who were inspired by her commitment to creating a fairer financial system. Around this time, Alicia was approached by a coalition of business leaders and community activists who had followed her work and wanted to collaborate on a national initiative for fair lending practices. The initiative, called the Equity in Entrepreneurship Project, EEP, aimed to create a standardized code of ethics for lenders, one that would prioritize transparency, equal opportunity, and accountability. The proposal was ambitious, but Alicia immediately recognized its potential. She agreed to serve as the project's lead advisor, working with a team of economists, policymakers, and activists to draft guidelines that would be presented to Congress. EEP's mission was to push for federal legislation that would hold financial institutions accountable, ensuring that discriminatory lending practices would face stricter penalties and oversight. The work was intense, requiring Alicia to split her time between her business, Pathway to Progress, and her advisory role with EEP. She traveled frequently, meeting with lawmakers, financial regulators, and industry leaders. Her days were long, filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and public appearances, but the work fueled her. She was no longer just a business owner advocating for fair treatment. She was a catalyst for national reform. After months of collaboration and negotiation, EEP released its proposal, urging Congress to consider new regulations that would ensure fair access to capital for all entrepreneurs. The initiative received widespread media attention, and Alicia was invited to testify before Congress, sharing her experience and advocating for the adoption of EEP's guidelines. On the day of her testimony, Alicia walked into the grand halls of Capitol Hill, her heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and determination. She took her seat before the panel, facing a room filled with lawmakers, journalists, and fellow advocates. As she spoke, she recounted her journey, from her initial rejection at Briarwood to the changes she had fought to implement, and finally to the national stage where she now stood, advocating for systemic change. "My story is not unique," she said, her voice steady. "There are countless entrepreneurs out there, people with vision and drive, who are denied the chance to succeed simply because they don't fit an outdated, biased mold. Access to capital is the lifeblood of innovation, and if we want a strong, inclusive economy, we must ensure that every qualified entrepreneur has an equal chance. This isn't just about business. It's about fairness, justice, and the American dream." Her testimony was met with applause, and Alicia felt a surge of hope as she looked around the room. She had planted a seed, and though the journey toward federal reform would be long, she was confident that the tide was turning. In the weeks that followed, Alicia's advocacy continued, with EEP gaining endorsements from several prominent business leaders and community organizations. Her work became a symbol of resilience and progress, inspiring a new generation of entrepreneurs who believed in the power of persistence and the possibility of change. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Alicia returned to her office and took a moment to reflect. Her journey had been unpredictable, filled with challenges she could never have anticipated. But as she looked at the walls of her office, now lined with awards, letters of gratitude, and photos of the businesses she had helped launch, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had turned her struggle into a movement, one that would shape the financial landscape for years to come. Her assistant, Julia, entered the office, a familiar smile on her face. "Alicia, you have a message from Nia Lawrence. She wants to thank you again and let you know that her catering business has expanded. She just opened her second location." Alicia felt a wave of pride, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Julia. Let's make a note to send her something to celebrate." As Julia left, Alicia looked around her office one last time, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She had become more than just a business owner. She had become a force for change, a champion for those who had been overlooked, and a symbol of what could be achieved when one person dared to stand up and demand better. And as she looked toward the future, Alicia knew her work was far from over. There were still doors to open, still barriers to break down, and still countless others who needed someone to believe in them. She was ready, armed with the lessons of her journey and the knowledge that one voice, when driven by purpose and justice, could indeed change the world. With a quiet resolve, Alicia leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady and determined. The fight was hers, but the victory belonged to everyone who believed in the power of equity, fairness, and hope. And as long as there was work to be done, Alicia Morgan would be there, paving the way for a brighter, more inclusive future.